The Menu has recently taken the internet by storm, and I don't blame it. It's a great film that has a lot to say about society, elitism, and our experience culture while remaining very entertaining. This film had me on the edge of my seat, and it left me thinking about it for days to come. So in this video, we're going to talk about the true meaning of the menu. We'll go over what it's trying to say on the surface, but we'll also talk about the deeper meanings that lie behind the variety of characters and the chef himself. It goes without saying, but there will be spoilers, so click away if you haven't seen the film just yet. You've been warned. Let's do a quick recap of the film's events. But I wanted to get something out of the way before we get started. Based on the description of the film, I honestly thought it was going to involve cannibalism at some point. And boy oh boy was I disappointed, relieved that it didn't. The Menu follows a group of mostly wealthy individuals who are visiting the exclusive restaurant Hawthorne to experience fine dining from one of the world's most renowned celebrity chefs, Julian Slowik. But as the night unfolds, the guests are surprised by the events that take place. They are served with a variety of dishes that have an array of different meanings behind them. Each dish is made with the intent of breaking down the guests' egos, scaring them, and embarrassing them, with the ultimate goal of everyone at Hawthorne dying in a s'mores-themed fiery blaze. The main character Margot was brought to Hawthorne by Tyler because his previous girlfriend broke up with him, so he needed to replace her. We are led to believe that Margot is Tyler's new girlfriend, but in reality, she is a sex worker that was hired by Tyler to come along. The inclusion of Margot in the guest list is surprising to Chef Slowik because she wasn't meant to be there in the first place. Her indifference to the food and opinion that it's pretentious is ultimately what leads her to surviving the events of the night. On the surface level, the menu is about the rich versus the poor. It is about elitism within our society. Throughout the evening, we learn that even though the guests are there to experience the food, no one really cares about the food. The guests are told not to eat, but to taste, and it doesn't seem like anyone other than Tyler really does that. But the more I think about it, the more I start to think that he might be faking it. What the guests really care about is the experience, or more importantly, they care about being socially validated by attending one of Slowik's exclusive dinners. We learn that none of the guests, except Tyler, who we'll talk about in depth later, really appreciated the food or the work involved to create such an intricate menu. Chef Slowik says it in the movie himself. The reason he wants to kill all of the guests that he specifically handpicked for that night is because each of them represents a type of person that resulted in the elitism within the industry, and ultimately its unattainability for the quote-unquote regular folk out there. The reason I say this is the obvious meaning of the movie is because it's pretty much explained by Slowik near the end. But I also think there are deeper meanings to the film that aren't so in your face. But before we talk about that, I want to go through each of the characters in the film and talk about how each of them is related to what Slowik views as the death of the fine dining industry. There is the snarky food critic and magazine publisher. We all know that the fine dining industry is filled with food critics that most assume to be snarky. And what better inclusion into Slowik's group of guests than someone who has an almost direct influence over what is deemed to be worthy of success in this industry. These critics yield so much power over the industry, even though everything they say is mostly subjective. They have the power to influence the careers of chefs and close entire restaurants down if they wanted to. It was actually funny to see how the critic's opinion of the food served throughout the night changed when she was put in danger. She no longer upheld any practices or standards, but instead let emotions drive her opinions. And who knows if some of her past reviews and decisions weren't driven by emotion as well. The snarky critic and food magazine are a double-edged sword though, because even though they are a big reason the industry is so elusive and tailored to the socially elite, they are also a big reason for the industry advancing as much as it did. It's because of the fear they cause in the industry that chefs and restaurants continuously invested in bettering the techniques of fine dining. But I guess that didn't make up for all of the bad they caused in Slowik's eyes. We also have another persona of the tech/Wall Street bros. This persona is a representation of today's experience-driven culture. In today's world, people want more experiences than tangible things like the food they are served. Because of this, restaurants have to adapt to not just providing food, but also the ambiance and the overall experience. As they continuously pushed the experience of dining further and further, it became less and less attainable to anyone but the wealthy. These people go to these places not so much to be fulfilled, but instead to be socially validated among their group for being able to have access to these exclusive places. There was actually a funny moment in the show Succession where the two characters go to the VIP section of a club to basically be alone and drink and not actually be part of the club, and these tech bros reminded me of those types of people. It wasn't until the experience was too over the top or ridiculous with the dish of condiments where they actually resorted to wanting one of the most basic foods. Simple bread. Then there's the persona of the older gentleman and his wife, who seem to be those old money type people. They couldn't name a single dish they ate at Hawthorne, despite having eaten there multiple times already. Their characters represent the type of people who are so abundantly wealthy that even these types of experiences have become mundane and unappreciated. They have been at Hawthorne multiple times, whereas others can't even go once because of the exclusivity or costs associated with it. And yet, they didn't even care enough about the food they ate to be able to name a single dish that was served. These were dishes that Chef Slowik painstakingly prepared for each of his guests. Dishes that were a culmination of a lifetime of work and education. This persona is the representation of the type of people that Slowik spent his life trying to please. People who were wealthy enough to eat his food, but ones that didn't care about it at all. Then there's the actor / producer along with his assistant. They also represent the type of people who are looking for social validation, similar to the tech bros. But they are also the type of people who are trying to benefit and mooch from the people creating these exclusive experiences instead of just enjoying the experience for what it is. In the movie, it seemed like the actor had somewhat of an agenda. He tried to propel the narrative that he is a friend of Chef Slowik. It seemed like the only reason Slowik invited him in the first place was because he created a bad movie. A movie that Slowik watched and wasted his day off with. But I also think he's the kind of person who's trying to capitalize on the food industry by making a TV series about it, which is yet another aspect of why fine dining has become so exclusive and difficult to experience unless you are part of the socially elite and wealthy. But let's talk about Tyler. Tyler is a clear representation of a group of people we are seeing more and more of today. A keyboard warrior, a person who is really interested and passionate, maybe even obsessed with fine dining, but as we saw with the Tyler's bullshit menu item, a person who doesn't actually know how to put the stuff he learned into practice. At first, I took the character of Tyler as a slap to the face because I'm here on YouTube talking about movies in the film industry without actually knowing how to create films myself. But I started to realize that this isn't the case. Tyler doesn't love fine dining because he enjoys it, he uses it to become more elite than others who don't know as much about it as him. He even went so far as to put down sports as being useless. He brought Margot, someone he sees as being inferior and disposable, along with him to Hawthorne, knowing that everyone would die. This shows us that even though he may not be a part of the elite group of people that are already there, he sees himself as more elite than other people. And then at the end, we see that this type of person, a person who wants to fit in with a certain group of people, just to fit in and not participate, dies without anybody by his side. He dies alone, off screen, at his own hands. Not even Chef Slowik, who Tyler idolized, put the effort in to kill him. And finally, we have Margot. Margot is the character that we can all relate to the most. She doesn't really care about being at Hawthorne and finds the food that they are serving to be lackluster and pretentious. Maybe she just doesn't understand because this type of food is more of an art form than anything else, but the transition of food that is meant to be enjoyed by people to a form of art with deeper meaning to it is one of the reasons that Chef Slowik ultimately grew to hate the fine dining industry. Her speaking up and asking for a simple burger that would satisfy her appetite at the end of the film reminded Chef Slowik the reason he decided to get into the industry in the first place, as a way to please people with food. As we discussed already, on the surface level, the menu is about the rich versus the poor, about elitism, but I believe it goes a little bit deeper than that. I think that this film is about what happens when passion turns into obsession, about how something that used to be a passion can turn into a self-destructive obsession when focusing on the wrong group of people. I also think that the menu is about the loss of innocence and the rise of corruption, and there's one guest in this film that represents this theme more than the others: Slowik's mother. Slowik's mother was one of the guests that we didn't talk about in the previous section, and she was one of the quiet cast members in this film. She's a representation of another theme that radiates throughout the movie: the theme of loss of innocence and corruption. When Slowik was a young child, his father was an abusive person towards him and his mother, which resulted in Mother Slowik going down a path of alcohol addiction. This directly mirrors the loss of innocence and rise of corruption that Slowik witnessed throughout his career as a chef. Just as he grew to hate his father and stab him in the thigh with scissors, he grew to hate the fine dining industry that mirrors his childhood. The industry is represented by his mother, who was innocent and not an alcoholic before the abusive father wore her out. Similar to how all of the guest types we mentioned before in the previous section ruined the fine dining industry. Because of Slowik's obsession with pleasing the socially elite, he sees himself as one of the reasons the fine dining industry has become so corrupt. We even see him take on the role of his father during one of the menu items by getting stabbed in the thigh with scissors. The final item on the menu, which were the s'mores, were also representing innocence. S'mores are one of the most innocent foods I can think of. A comfort food that is meant to be made and eaten around a campfire while hanging out with friends. Margot is also a symbol of innocence in the film, and a reminder to Chef Slowik that she should have been the target of his cooking, because pleasing people in the way he did with her is the main reason he got into the industry in the first place. I really enjoyed the menu. It's one of those movies that left me thinking about it long after it was done because of how much it had to say. We really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have other thoughts about the movie, make sure to leave a comment. I'd love to keep the conversation going and see what other meanings all of you could pick out. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to subscribe to FilmStack. We have a ton of videos coming soon and would hate for you to miss out on them. But until next time, have a good one.